This is part 2 of a series where I talk about my favorite movies of all time. If you haven't seen part 1, I talk about these 10 movies in it. I'll put a link in the description, and with that, let's continue. Number 50, Mad Max Fury Road. This movie is everything I want in an action movie. It is almost entirely action. The movie is basically one extremely well-directed chase sequence. The shot composition is perfect, the editing is energetic without overusing quick cuts. The movie mastered action with vehicles in a way I don't think can ever be outdone. The film had graphic novel-styled storyboards before they even had a screenplay. Storyboards made over the course of 2 years to make sure every image is memorable and ridiculously over the top in a way that's really fun. Then the film was shot very practically. Obviously there's a lot of computer-generated imagery, but it's used as sparingly as they realistically could have, and never gets in the way of the tangible stunts and explosions that were done practically. The CGI feels like it's only there to show off this fantastical world. Visually, the film is beautiful. It's bright and colorful. The production design creatively uses real-world objects in a way that gives the movie a distinct look and makes the world feel lived in. The movie doesn't waste time explaining the post-apocalyptic world. There is about 30 seconds at the start where Max explains what happens to the world, and then the movie just gets started. We don't waste time in between the action scenes to develop characters and relationships. These moments are done in dramatic and exciting ways so the film never loses its sense of urgency. There's enough story so that the action has weight to it, because what's happening always has an effect on the character's goals. I remember I was setting up a projector I got, and I used Mad Max Fury Road as a way to test it and play around with picture settings. I was planning on watching 5 minutes of this movie and ended up watching the entire thing. It's that captivating. You can't stop watching this movie once you start it, because the movie never slows down. It's the most fun action movie ever made.
He turned his head, he looked me straight in the eye! He was scanning the horizon! No! I am awaited! I am awaited in Valhalla!
Number 49, Come and See. Come and See has a reputation of being the most brutal and realistic war film ever made, and that reputation is entirely deserved. This film was made in 1985, but there's really no way of telling that from just watching the movie. It genuinely feels like the filmmakers were sent back to the Second World War and just started rolling the cameras, which is almost always the feeling I want from a period piece. I think that the performances are one of the most important aspects of making a film realistic. All the actors, and especially the child actors, are completely believable in this film, and I have no interest in finding out how that was achieved. The performance from the lead is genuinely one of the best performances I've ever seen in a movie. This kid carries this entire movie on his shoulders. So many of the most memorable moments of this film are just close-ups of his face, and they are just haunting. The way his performance changes over the course of the movie is incredible, and plays a big part in creating what I believe to be the greatest anti-war film of all time. The first half of this film is uncomfortable and ominous, but the second half is just absolutely horrifying. If you're interested in ruining your day by putting yourself in the shoes of a child in Belarus during World War II and getting a vivid understanding of what that experience would be like, consider watching Come and See. Number 48, 12 Angry Men. 12 Angry Men is one of those movies that sounds like it should be incredibly boring. It's black and white, it's nearly 70 years old, it essentially all takes place in a single jury room, and it's pretty much all played out in real time. There are many films from this era that feel like a bit of a chore to watch for me, but 12 Angry Men does not require you to force yourself to pay attention at any point. The story is always unfolding and engaging, it somehow never feels dull, and I don't know how they did it. I think it's just the great writing. There are so many clever moments and quotes, and the performances are all great. The premise is an 18-year-old boy is on trial for murder, and these 12 jurors have to decide whether or not he's guilty. If it's unanimous that the boy is guilty, he will receive capital punishment. 11 of the jurors feel certain that he's guilty, but one juror has reasonable doubt. It is a very simple film, and you pretty much know exactly where it's going and how it'll end the moment the plot begins. But to watch it all unfold is what makes it so engrossing.
Now, are you trying to tell me that this knife really fell through a hole in the boy's pocket? Someone picked it up off the street, went to the boy's house, and stabbed his father with it just to test its sharpness?
No, I'm just saying it's possible the boy lost his knife, and that somebody else stabbed his father with a similar knife. It's just possible.
Take a look at this knife. It's a very unusual knife. I've never seen one like it. Neither had the storekeeper who sold it to the boy. Aren't you asking us to accept a pretty incredible coincidence?
I'm just saying a coincidence is possible.
And I say it's not possible.
Where did that come from? It's the same knife.
Number 47. Pink Floyd, The Wall. This film is a musical using the material from Pink Floyd's 1979 album, The Wall. The film is essentially a 90-minute long music video. There's quite a bit of editing from the album. A couple of songs were cut for the movie, a couple were added from other projects, a couple songs were re-recorded for the movie, the order of the tracks was changed a bit, but for the most part you will essentially be listening to the entire album with visual accompaniment. I will say this movie probably could have been better with a bigger budget. The animated sequences are easily the best parts of the film, but they're a little too few and far between, and also some of them are a bit repetitive because they had to reuse footage. The sequences for Empty Spaces and Goodbye Blue Sky are incredibly visually striking, and the trial sequence is one of my favorite scenes in any movie ever, and a huge part of why this movie is ranking so high on this list. Also, this movie gets a big boost because I just love all this music. The Wall is one of my favorite albums. One of My Turns, Comfortably Numb, and The Trial are three of my favorite songs of all time, so yeah, I have a bit of a bias here. If you don't know about this film and this album, they are both about the people and experiences that cause our protagonist Pink to isolate himself and be emotionally unavailable, and what that leads to. I feel like music and visual metaphor are two of the strongest ways to make statements and express feelings, and those aspects are so top-notch in this film, and it's why I love it so much.
Cold as a razor blade, tight as a tourniquet, dry as a funeral drum. Come to the bedroom and the suitcase on the left, you'll find my favorites. Don't be surprised, this is just a passing phase of my bad days.
Number 46. The Lego Movie. If you think it's weird that The Lego Movie is one of my favorite films of all time, then I think it's time for you to rewatch it. This movie is a joy to watch. It is genuinely funny from start to finish, and there is not a frame of this film that is bland visually. It is one of the only films with 3D animation that I think chooses that medium purposefully. The way they use the camera in the three-dimensional environment is incredibly creative. The same goes for the way they play with frame rates, depth of field, and lighting. 10 years later, and this film still looks like stop-motion animation with real Lego. The film parodies modern TV and music, and it's a clever parody of story cliches in general. It's one of the only movies that incorporates countless IPs and pop culture references and feels like it's doing it with a purpose. It is also a movie that satirizes politics, societal structures with social commentary and Orwellian imagery that works hilariously well with Lego. It's also kind of just a silly toy ad for children, but the movie never feels cynical because of that. The marketing is never so transparent it takes away from the entertainment value, and it feels like the merchandise was a product of the film rather than the other way around. Hilarious movie that I've watched way too many times to count.
Look, it's not my fault. I have no idea how this thing got on my back.
Of course, buddy. I believe you.
Great.
I believe you, too. You see the quotations I'm making with my claw hands? It means I don't believe you. Why else would you show up with that thing on your back just 3 days before President Business is going to use the crackle to end the world?
President Business is going to end the world? But he's such a good guy. In Octan, they make good stuff. Music, dairy products, coffee, TV shows, surveillance systems, all history books, voting machines. Wait a minute.
Number 45. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. This is not the first Terry Gilliam film about escapism, but I think the angle here is unique in the way it's a cautionary tale / complete insanity. Actually, perhaps that's most of his movies. This movie captures the experience of Las Vegas, the experience of doing a bunch of drugs, and the experience of doing a bunch of drugs in Las Vegas, in the most entertaining way possible. It is such a visually overstimulating environment. The performances are hilarious and amazing from everybody, the filmmaking and effects are incredibly trippy, and even if you don't know exactly what's going on, it hardly matters. It's more about just experiencing the madness of the characters. Every time I rewatch Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, I feel like I'm watching it for the first time. It's so scatterbrained in structure in a way that prevents me from remembering it all. But whenever I finish the movie, I feel an immense joy that Terry Gilliam was given the funding to make his insane vision come to life. And it's not like the film has nothing to say. There are clear messages about the United States, its laws, how the laws are enforced, and how our culture is created out of these practices. It is my go-to movie to watch when I'm feeling sick. When you're feeling kind of gross and out of it, this movie is the perfect vibe. It might also be my favorite movie soundtrack ever. Amazing collection of great songs that are all used perfectly in this movie. There are a lot of films I would describe as having playlist soundtracks, but what makes this movie different is that Terry Gilliam knows exactly how to incorporate these songs into the movie. It is endlessly enjoyable and a crazy experience.
16 years old, they chopped the goddamn head off right there in the parking lot, and then they cut all kinds of holes in her and sucked out the blood. They were after the pineal gland, I think. Yeah. Now, how's your mama?
Ignore this terrible drug. Yeah. Pretend it's not happening.
Hi there! My name? Raoul Duke, on the list. Free lunch, final wisdom, total coverage. I have my attorney.
Number 44, Princess Mononoke. I am a big Ghibli fan, and this was my favorite for many years. There is one that I now believe is a little bit better, but Princess Mononoke is still easily second for me. It's a very hard film to compare to anything else, other than some prior Ghibli films, because there's really nothing like Princess Mononoke. Not only are mature and bloody stories incredibly rare in animation, but this film has such a unique structure and a unique set of characters. Lady Eboshi is a perfect villain, but then again, is she even a villain? She doesn't feel like an animated movie villain, she feels like a real person, and by the end of the movie it's hard to even call her a bad one. That sort of characterization is what you get from great Ghibli films and barely anywhere else. Characters that aren't meant to be archetypes, they're really just people within the universe who act in ways that they realistically would given their circumstances. The universe in general feels really grounded and tangible despite being full of mysticism. I can't believe I've gone this far though without mentioning the visuals. The animation in this film is absolutely stunning at every turn. It is one of the most beautiful animated movies I've ever seen. It takes such advantage of its medium, doing things you could never do with live action. This movie's message about the environment and about war are obvious, but somehow never feel preachy, which is a really hard balancing act that very few writers are able to achieve. The music and sound design is incredible, and I think this scene in particular is a great showcase of that. Number 43, Whiplash. This movie is a lot funnier to me since I've become a drum teacher. This is another film like Pink Floyd's The Wall where I wouldn't really rank this film as high if I were ranking the greatest films of all time. Whiplash definitely has flaws. To avoid spoilers, I'll be as vague as possible, but if you've seen the film, you should know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a plot point I would have liked more of an explanation for. I think it was intentionally made completely ambiguous, and I think that was the wrong move. There's also a scene which has dialogue which I think is far too transparent in terms of the point the film is trying to get across, which ends up making the dialogue feel preachy and unnatural. But other than that, I really don't have a single problem with the film. I know a lot of people feel that the performance of the instruments were too obviously faked, but as someone who plays many of the instruments in the film, including the drums, I never found it distracting. There are definitely points where you can tell if you're paying close attention, but every other aspect of the film is so entertaining for me, I'm rarely hyper-focused on those elements. There are also many points where I could definitely tell that the performance were not being cheated, which is impressive because it seems like those are scenes where it would be the most demanding of musical ability. So that aspect never really got in the way of my enjoyment. Neither did the inaccuracies in portraying how a jazz band is conducted. My response to that would be, of course it's inaccurate. It's so blatantly over the top in every way. Finally, let's talk about what I love most about the film. I think many of you will agree with me when I say that J.K. Simmons' performance as Fletcher is the best character performance of the 2010s. Every scene with him is the most entertaining shit ever. Miles Teller is perfect for his role too. I don't know how to say this without sounding like an asshole, but he is perfect at playing someone who's whiny and annoying. The editing along with the music choices are perfect, the color grading is iconic, and the story of someone who is obsessed with his abilities and legacy is incredibly captivating. I don't think I have heard more arguments about any other movie. There seems to be a lot of people who take the story entirely as a cautionary tale, and others who see Neiman's arc as more of a positive one. There's also a divide in whether Fletcher's teaching methods are somewhat justified. Here's the thing about opinions, they're all wrong unless they're mine. I'll be vague, but we're kind of getting into spoiler territory here, so if you haven't seen the movie, maybe just skip ahead to the next film, and also you should watch Whiplash because it's really good. But anyways, my personal opinion is Fletcher in the real world would have obviously been fired ages before the movie starts. His abuse is crossing lines that I shouldn't have to point out as unacceptable. A lot of people think he's right when he says the next Charlie Parker would never be discouraged, but if that mindset were really true, which I don't think it is, then why is it even necessary to try to verbally abuse these students? If the next Charlie Parker would never be discouraged, by that logic, this method of teaching would be completely unnecessary. If nothing is ever going to change that imaginary prodigy's level of motivation, and if nothing in the world could ever discourage him, then all you're doing is just discouraging a bunch of other talented musicians. It's my opinion that embarrassing and scaring students may make them temporarily motivated to achieve a task, but it's not actually going to make them want to learn a skill, which should be the goal when teaching an art form like music. However, to play devil's advocate a bit, I think it is important to mention that all of these students are choosing to be there. They can leave whenever they want, but they don't want to because they want to impress him. Clearly, this all takes a toll on Neiman. His desire to be the best and his motivation, while in many ways admirable, is also obviously damaging him physically and mentally. As the film goes on, he kind of becomes a bigger and bigger asshole. He cuts social ties until he's basically a recluse. He seems more and more aggravated all the time. He just seems broken by the end of the film. Clearly, the balance between his passion and his well-being is way out of whack, right? However, I'll also say this. He seems genuinely fulfilled by the end of the film, and I don't think there was any other way he would have achieved that. It's of my opinion that he probably completely changes soon after the movie's over because his lifestyle in the film is just not sustainable. But for the time being, it seems like it's the only way for this character to be happy with himself, and if that's the case, maybe it's the right call. Number 42, Schindler's List. This is one of those classic movies where there's really not much I can say that hasn't been said a million times. I don't really see the point in me talking about how sad this movie is or what I think the girl in the red coat symbolizes, so instead I actually want to talk about some of the criticisms I've heard about this film. I know a lot of people who think this film is too commercial and even feel like it's exploitative. In terms of being commercial, I would say it's kind of a strength of Spielberg that he's able to make a 3-hour film about this subject and yet it's still incredibly beloved by millions of people. As for it being exploitative, a lot of my favorite filmmakers actually share that belief. There's a Stanley Kubrick quote that I think has actually been pretty misinterpreted, where he says that Schindler's List is about success, whereas the Holocaust was about failure. I think most people think he's criticizing the film, but I think he's just trying to say that Schindler's List isn't really about the Holocaust. Because it isn't. The film is really about the importance and duty to help people in need, and while World War II may be the setting, the movie intends to apply to any period of time, because sadly there will always be people who are in dire need of their lives being saved. The last scene is obviously a real tearjerker, but the penultimate one is the most impactful by far. The penultimate scene in this is the reason I put this film on this list. I'll refrain from showing it though because I know it would be doing a disservice to the film for those who haven't seen it. And if you haven't seen this film, what are you doing? This is one of those films that can genuinely make you a better person.
My plant manager is somewhere on this train. If it leaves with him on it, it'll disrupt production, and the armaments board will want to know why.
Is he on the list?
Yes, sir. It's a Stern.
Well, the list is correct, sir. There's nothing I can do.
What is your name?
My name? My name is Kunda. Hauptscharführer, Kunda.
K-U-N.
And what's yours?
Schindler. S-C-H-I-N-D-L-E-R. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I think I can guarantee you'll both be in southern Russia before the end of the month. Good day.
Stern! 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 Itzhak, Stern!
And I'll end this video with what is widely considered to be the greatest film of all time. Number 41, Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane did not leave much of an impact on me the first time I saw it, but on rewatch it is everything people say it is. The language of modern filmmaking was practically birthed with this movie. It also kinda has the first jump scare in film history, just to make sure you don't doze off before the credits roll. Orson Welles directed, produced, starred, and had final cut over this film. Notice I didn't say he wrote it. Most people now believe that Herman Mankiewicz primarily wrote the film. But anyways, what makes Citizen Kane so great? I tend to find old films intimidating. Even though there are many older films I love, there are so many that are difficult for me to get through. This film is everything I want from older cinema. There are countless great memorable shots in this film, the use of framing and deep focus lens is perfect. So many great uses of special effects, and the amount of special effects is mind-blowing, many of which are completely seamless even today. It's a film that uses every trick in the book, and it's so much fun to watch if you love filmmaking. The premise is fantastic. Media tycoon Charles Foster Kane has died, but moments before he died, he said one mysterious final word: Rosebud. A reporter is then tasked with deciphering this final word by learning everything he can about Charles Foster Kane. The non-chronological structure in which we view Kane's life is so perfect, and while so many films have tried, I don't think a single other film has ever replicated its quality. The dialogue is probably my favorite part of the film. So many great lines. The screenplay is truly, truly perfect. It's really just one memorable, iconic, and enjoyable scene after another. I'll end this video with this quote by Orson Welles. When asked how he was able to make the film, Welles answered, "Ignorance. Sheer ignorance. It's only when you know something about a profession that you're timid or careful." So if you're starting a creative pursuit, I think it's good to remain somewhat ignorant, because when you're ignorant to the practicalities, your vision is untethered and often leads you to something completely new. And who knows, you might just make the most influential film of all time.
Well, I happened to see your financial statement today, Charles.
Oh, did you?
Now, tell me honestly, my boy, don't you think it's rather unwise to continue this philanthropic enterprise? This Inquirer that's costing you $1 million a year?
You're right, Mr. Thatcher. I did lose $1 million last year. I expect to lose $1 million this year. I expect to lose $1 million next year. You know, Mr. Thatcher, at the rate of $1 million a year, I'll have to close this place in 60 years.